A general introduction to Daoism. Hello, this is Dr. Bing Song at Washington College for the course of Introduction to Comparative Religion, Eastern. The 4 stages of the development of Daoism can be summarized as follows. Firstly, it starts as a seriously dissenting voice among the so-called 100 schools of thought in the period Spring and Autumn and the Warring States, with the dissent here mainly understood as being against or simply different from the emphasis of Ruism, Confucianism, on education, ritualization, social activism, and ethical governance. The gist of the descent of Daoism from Ruism in their classical period can be briefly described as follows. In face of the rampant social turmoil and interstate wars created by the collapse of the late Zhou dynasty, Confucius diagnosed the origin of the social disease as the under-civilization or under-humanization of each human individual. Therefore, in order to recover the social order and regain the so-called peace under the heavens, as elaborated by the text of Great Learning, Confucius' ambition was to build an independent school to provide people with a more universal access to education, and furthermore to cultivate students' virtue and knowledge via a broad learning process of the fruits of ancient civilizations. Ultimately, Confucius intended his students to become a noble-minded, exemplary human, the so-called Junzi, and hence get hired by governments to serve the society as ethical and competent civil leaders. For Confucius, this process of education and self-cultivation of a Junzi is the ultimate path for the society to recover the delicate ritual system that once functioned well in early Zhou dynasty, and hence to realize the sustainable development of the civilization. However, for the Taoist philosophers such as Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, they have different understanding of the situation. They thought the cause of social turmoil is not the under-civilization of human individuals. It is actually the over-civilization of human individuals when their innocent, naturally flourishing human life gets complicated by the increase of human knowledge, the artificiality of human intelligence, the unrestrained social computation, and the advancement of technology. In other words, for Taoist thinkers, education leads to the overdevelopment of human intelligence, and if individuals rely upon this advanced development of human intelligence to compete for limited social resource, chaos will follow and the government will fall apart. Therefore, rather than calling for more education and social engagement of the so-called noble-minded exemplary individuals, Taoist thinkers advocate less education and less social engagement of human beings in general. Ultimately, a primitive natural state of society, where each human individual enjoys their life alone with little use of technology and sociality, will be the ideal society human being could ever have. Of course, this is a rather very sketchy account of the contrast between Daoism and Ruism, and I intend the value of this account to be more heuristic than prescriptive. However, an important angle to understand the origin of Daoism, similar to the case of Buddhism versus Vedic and Upanishadic Hinduism, is indeed to grasp how different and similar it is in comparison to the Ru school, which Confucius helped to transmit and strengthen. This is also the reason why it is appropriate to teach the Taoist tradition after Ruism in our course. Secondly, everything we just talked of transpired in the pre-Qin period of ancient China. After Qin dynasty reunified the warring states and was shortly replaced by another unifying dynasty, Han dynasty, Taoism, mainly in the form of the so-called Huang Lao thought, played a very prominent role of statecraft and governance in early Han dynasty, largely from 202 to 130 BCE. The major sociological reason for such a prominent role is that the Taoist political philosophy, as indicated by the above account, largely takes a laissez-faire approach, which precludes the substantial interference and proactive coordination of governments with the local people's economic and social activities. This mentality fits very well with the need of early Han Dynasty to recover itself from the devastating wars and turmoils caused by the dynastical change between Qin and Han. In this period of its history, Taoist thought also incorporated a class of thoughts and practice that flourished here and there in the vast Han territory, and developed features such as the practice of sorcery, divination, shamanistic rituals, longevity, medicine, and the cosmological speculation over the all-pervasive correlation of everything in the universe via the theory of the yin-yang and 5 phases. Thirdly, however, under the reign of the Emperor Wu, the central government of Han Dynasty intended more ideological unity of its political system. In front of the Emperor Wu, there were mainly 3 options for him to achieve this. Firstly, legalism, which emphasizes strengthening the central authority of an empire through a strict law system of reward and punishment. This school of thought was once adopted by the prior Qin dynasty. It helped Qin to win over enemies on the battlefield and thus reunify the territory. But it failed Qin in the later peaceful time, since Qin's harsh punishments upon its subjects engendered uncontrollable resentments and rebellions. Qin accordingly became one of the most short-lived dynasties in ancient Chinese history. In light of Qin's failure, legalism seems not quite a choice for Emperor Wu. The second choice was Daoism, which, as stated, was favored by the Han emperors prior to Wu for quite a length of time. However, the laissez-faire approach of statecraft might be good for a time of recovery from devastating wars, but not equally fit for the sustainable development of a country, since the growth of local economic and political powers needs coordination, and the unity of the central government needs to be supported by strong ideology. So, eventually, propelled by Ru scholars' persuading efforts, such as Dong Zhongshu, the Emperor Wu chose Ruism, one lineage of thought that cherishes the values of ancient civilization, emphasizes unity within diversity, and favors a soft approach via education, family nurturing, and ritualized public life to regain the desired unity. In other words, in the eyes of the Emperor Wu, the Ru tradition incorporates the good sides, avoids the bad sides from other schools of thought, and more importantly conserve the diverse needs of social classes while still being able to unify the entire country as a whole. This decisive policy move by the Emperor Wu was named by later historians as, quote, taking down 100 schools of thought while venerating the Ru statecraft alone, quote. Then we got to the 4th stage of the development of Taoist religion in ancient China, the impact of the edict of the Emperor Wu in Han Dynasty to elevate the status of Ruism turned out to be extremely profound and long-lasting for the entire history of Imperial China until early 20th century. Ruism became a state ideology, and its vast knowledge about ethics, statecraft, and ancient civilization constitute the major criteria by which varying dynasties and imperial courts select governmental officials among young and ambitious literati via the system of civil examination. In other words, Ruism became the intellectual and spiritual foundation of the social elite of ancient China. This drove Daoism and its devoted affiliates and sympathizers, who were once very powerful in the court of early Han Dynasty, to find alternative social spaces to survive and evolve. In this regard, the establishment of the theocratic regime Tian Shi Dao, the Way of Heavenly Master by Zhang Daolin, in the remote southwestern areas and in a time of rampant peasant rebellions in late Han Dynasty was a milestone event. This was the first time Daoism got established as an organized religion, and such a Taoist religion also started to construct its pantheon of deities, compile its canon, build its monastery, officialize its rules of rituals and ceremonies, and hence get intertwined with the families and communities of its surrounding local area. However, despite that Tianshi Dao being the first organized Taoist religion in ancient China, there were various Taoist religions created in the later history, which had no organizational relationship with the Tianshi Dao. On the other hand, although the Taoist thought lost its favor in the imperial court and the reign of the Emperor Wu in Han Dynasty, it never completely disappeared from politics. Rather, certain reigns of emperors in some dynasties actually were quite fond of the Taoist religion and saw themselves as a loyal devotee of those Taoist deities for the everyday life of local commoners and folks. We also witnessed a ceaseless process of intermingling and mutual generating of practices and thoughts among the Taoist, Buddhist, Western folk religions, and the dominant Ruist social ethics. For instance, you will find strong traces of the Buddhist breathing technique in the Taoist method of inner alchemy. You will find Taoist groups sometimes quite fervently advocate the rule ethic of fidelity to parents, loyalty to rulers, and humanity to all beings. You can even find the Catholic idea of purgatory to be overtly taught in some of the Taoist canon. In other words, in the fourth stage of the development of Taoist religion, it constantly meanders, metamorphizes, and proliferates into a loosely recognizable body of the so-called Taoist religion, which includes a vast array of deviance, devolution, and diversity. Because of this, I believe you must feel somewhat confused if you decide to learn Taoism, starting from the most recent form of Taoist religious order in the contemporary world, just as the assigned video indicates, since it would lie at the very end of history, which has evolved for almost 3,000 years, and thus was itself predominantly featured by diversity rather than unity. Nevertheless, all trees, no matter how much ramified and widespread they seem, have their roots. By the same token, no matter how diverse Taoist orders can be from each other, they almost all read Laozi and Zhuangzi, the earliest Taoist texts in the initial stages of Taoist religion. Therefore, for our introductory course on Eastern religion, we'll spend some considerable time to read those two texts as well. I hope via this approach of being introduced to Taoism, we can be equipped with the basic intellectual tools to understand the later, more colorful development of Taoist religion.